Title: They Thought He Was Powerless. Then Ibrahim Traoré shook the world. As dawn was still dreamy on the red, dusty fields of Burkina Faso, a young man stood still in the midst of the land cracked by poverty and war. His name was Ibrahim Traoré, a name then unknown to the world. No power, no money, no great backing, only a fiery gaze and an unyielding belief in his heart. The world at that time, if it looked back at Africa, saw only chaos and failure. Analysts sat in high-rise buildings in Europe and America, shaking their heads in pity. They are just powerless nations, they said with disdain. Burkina Faso, a small, backward country with nothing to worry about, and Ibrahim Traoré, just an unknown officer, a small grain of sand in the vast desert. But there were fires smoldering under the ashes, just waiting for the right wind to flare up into a storm. Ibrahim grew up in poverty. He saw tired faces, skinny hands who had worked all their lives but still didn't have enough to eat. He saw children who had aged prematurely, mothers who cried silently in the dark. And most importantly, he saw injustice, a country rich in resources but suffocated by external forces, by bottomless greed and betrayal from within. Traoré was no dreamer. He didn't write flashy speeches. He didn't create empty slogans. He trained silently. On scorching days, he trained his endurance. On dark, lampless nights, he trained his will. In hushed conversations in the barracks, he kindled his faith. People looked at him and sneered. Some of his superiors, who had been trained in France, considered him a rough country bumpkin. The old politicians, used to living on aid money, looked down on him as a naive country boy. Even within the army, many people whispered, "What can he do?" But Ibrahim Traoré did not react. He quietly observed, quietly memorized every face, every look. And deep down he understood. They had misjudged him from the very first moment. As the corrupt government became more and more ruthless, as famine swept through villages, as children died without anyone bothering to mention their names, men like Ibrahim began to lose patience. He was not a rebel, but he could no longer keep his head down. One night, in a small room filled with only the sound of a fan and the dim light of a kerosene lamp, Traoré gathered the men he trusted most. There were no solemn oaths, no flowery speeches. There was only heavy silence and a simple question. Do we still want to live as insulted people? No one answered in words. They just looked at each other, and in that gaze, a silent revolution began. From then on, Ibrahim Traoré set out on a path of no return. Every day, it became clearer to him that if he wanted to change the fate of Burkina Faso, he would have to do what was considered impossible. He would have to touch the power that had been monopolized for so long by those who considered themselves inviolable. But how could a young officer, without a powerful family, without a large arsenal, without financial backing, shake an entire regime? The outside world, when it heard this, would only laugh coldly. They sat in cold conference rooms, sipping wine and asserting, "A child cannot do anything." Major news agencies, international organizations, veteran politicians all were convinced that Burkina Faso would forever be a weak pawn on the global chessboard of power. And that was their first mistake. Ibrahim did not attack with sophisticated weapons. He did not overthrow with blind violence. He ignited something more powerful than any gun: pride. He ignited in the minds of the poor a simple but dangerous question. Why do we let others decide our destiny? Bit by bit, the fire spread. People, groups, towns began to whisper the name Ibrahim Traoré like a secret prayer. No longer an unknown officer, he became a symbol of something the country had not dared to dream of for too long: hope. The world, still blinded by its complacency, had no idea that a storm was brewing in the smallest blade of grass. And then, one day, as the sun burned every corner, Ibrahim Traoré stepped out of the shadows, ready to face his fate. They thought he had no strength. They thought he would fall. They were wrong. Back then, no one thought that a young man like Ibrahim Traoré could do anything great. When the first shots rang out, when the slogans demanding the rights of the people rang out, the world just shrugged and looked on indifferently. Foreign diplomats, sitting in cool air-conditioned conference rooms, even laughed when they heard the news, "In Burkina Faso? A coup by children?" They didn't understand. They didn't know. They were used to judging people by the suits they wore, by the Western university degrees they hung on the wall, and a man like Ibrahim, barefoot, raised on the red soil, educated with blood and sweat, in their eyes, was nothing more than a rebellious barbarian. But inside Burkina Faso, things were different. Traoré did not enter the presidential palace amid fireworks or flattering praise. He entered in silence, like a ghost emerging from a nation's unfinished dream. His uniform was worn, his shoes had frayed soles, and his eyes were as cold as hot steel. The day he announced his takeover, only a small group of soldiers stood behind him. No podium, no flags. Only one voice rang out in the scorching sun: "We will take back what is ours." The world sneered. The major news agencies ran headlines. "An unknown officer seizes power in Burkina Faso." Not yet. 35. Another interim president will soon be swallowed up. No one outside his country believed Ibrahim could stand. The early days of his rule were dark. Food ran out. The army disintegrated. The former officials were plotting to betray. The pressure from outside was mounting. Embargoes, threats, slander. They wanted to strangle Traoré before he could even stand up straight. Even within the new government, many secretly despised him. They gathered behind his back and whispered, "He only knows how to hold a gun. How does he understand politics? Wait and see, he'll run into the wall." An old general who had taught him elementary lessons now sat cross-legged on a chair, puffing on a cigar and sneering every time he heard the name Traoré in the hall. They thought he would make a mistake, that he would sign agreements to sell out the country to beg for aid, that he would panic, submit, become a docile pawn, like so many others before him. But this time, history chose a different path. Ibrahim Traoré, whom they mocked, began to counterattack not with bullets, but with invisible firmness. He visited the poorest regions, where no president had ever bothered to set foot before. He sat with skinny peasants by the fire, listening to each story of hunger, of broken promises, of crushed dreams. He made no empty promises. He said only one thing: "I am one of you. If I betray you, overthrow me." And from then on, something strange began to happen. In the remote villages, people no longer looked at the government with the cold eyes they had before. They began to believe. Not in the propaganda posters, not in the flowery speeches. They believed in a man in a faded uniform, wading through the mud, sitting among them like a brother. Meanwhile, the powerful in the capital were impatient. Foreign diplomats sent telegrams demanding dialogue, that is, imposing conditions. Foreign companies sent people to entice him, offering financial support if Traoré would make concessions. The international media fabricated slanderous stories. Ibrahim was undeterred. He refused dirty loans. He refused to allow the exploitation of natural resources indiscriminately. He declared firmly, "We are not slaves. Burkina Faso will stand on its own 2 feet or die with honor." To many, that statement sounded like a declaration of war. But Ibrahim understood clearly. Freedom is never a gift. It must be earned with sweat, with tears, and if necessary, with blood. The old forces, panicked by the loss of control, began to plot dark tricks. Armed groups were secretly funded. Exiled politicians were incited to cause unrest. Assassination plots, coup plots, smear campaigns, all were unleashed like a whirlwind. As each day passed, danger surrounded Traoré, but instead of retreating, he became more determined. Once, a close advisor advised him with a trembling voice, "Mr. President, They will not spare you. You must give in to save your life." Ibrahim looked the man straight in the eye. His voice was deep and cold as steel. "Living on your knees, what is the point of living?" In that moment, everyone in the room fell silent. They knew that this man would never retreat. A storm was brewing, and this time, it would not stop for anyone. The months that followed were a fierce trial that even the strongest souls tremble when they remember. During the day, Ibrahim Traoré faced cold diplomatic speeches and veiled threats behind polite handshakes. At night, he and his loyal soldiers stayed up all night, plotting defenses and listening to secret reports of assassination plots lurking in every corner. Betrayal did not come only from the outside. It came from the closest places, from those he had trusted, from those who had sworn to live and die for the flag he had raised. One rainy evening, when the streets of Ouagadougou had turned into rivers of mud, Ibrahim was tipped off. A group of senior officers, agents of the old regime, were secretly assembling forces to overthrow him. They did not come with ammunition, but with sweet handshakes, with hidden offers of bribes. They sent him a message: "Give up power. We will guarantee you a peaceful life abroad. If not, do not blame us for being cruel." Ibrahim held the paper in his hand, his eyes reading each line, his lips pressed together. No expression was visible. Then he burned the letter right in front of the messengers. The green flames licked up the threats, leaving a cold, burnt smell in the cramped room. "They think I'm afraid," he said, his voice as deep as distant thunder. "But their betrayal will strengthen us." The next day, as dawn broke over the capital, a lightning operation was launched. No sirens, no loudspeakers, just quiet footsteps and the thunderous slamming of doors. Each captured traitorman who had once sat at the same table, who had once laughed and talked as friends, now bowed their heads before the icy gaze of the man they had betrayed. No needless bloodshed. Ibrahim ordered humane treatment, a public trial. For he knew, if it began with blind violence, the revolution would eat itself up. But betrayals never die so easily. In the north, foreign-backed militias began to stir. They took over small villages, spreading fear with guns and daggers. They were saying that the new government was weak, that Traoré could not protect the people. Ibrahim knew he had to act quickly. He did not hide behind the high walls of the presidential palace. He put on his old uniform, his scuffed helmet, and personally led the small column north. It was not a parade. It was a life and death struggle. Under the scorching sun, armored vehicles rolled down the red, dusty road. The soldiers were thin, but their eyes were bright with faith. They were not fighting for money. They were fighting for an ideal they had thought had long since died: national pride. The fighting was fierce. Blood stained the dry streams. The sound of gunfire was mixed with the shouts of "For freedom, for Burkina Faso." Ibrahim, amidst the smoke and fire, did not retreat an inch. He fought like a real soldier, not sitting safely in a command vehicle, not hiding behind the shield of excuses. Once, in a fierce clash, he was hit by shrapnel in the shoulder. People shouted to take him back to the rear. But Ibrahim just pulled the shrapnel out, bandaged it with a torn strip of his shirt, and continued to charge. "Don't cry for me," he roared at the panicked young soldiers. "Fight for the children who are waiting for us to return." His words were like a fire that ignited a hidden power. Those small troops, people who had been despised by the world, had swept the enemy from their land with their own blood and courage. When the dust cleared, when the smoke subsided, the ruined villages were still standing. But now they saw a miracle. The Burkina Faso flag fluttering on the highest hilltop, and a young man, bandaged and bloody, still standing, his eyes shining like a sacred fire. The whole country was shaken. From the barren fields to the poor neighborhoods, people began to whisper a name with sincere respect: Ibrahim Traoré, the unbroken. The outside world, now, no longer dared to laugh. Diplomats called to request meetings. International media outlets changed their tune. Russia published articles praising him. Large organizations were confused and tried to restore relations. But Ibrahim Traoré was not overwhelmed. He understood that praise was as fickle as the wind. He just smiled faintly and continued walking on the path he had chosen, a path filled with blood, tears, but also filled with hope. Because he knew the biggest battle was still waiting ahead. And this time, no one would dare to underestimate him anymore. But then, when the wounds had not yet healed, when the flag of freedom was still fluttering in incomplete joy, Ibrahim Traoré faced a challenge more brutal than anything he had ever experienced: the significance of loyalty and national pride through the image of Ibrahim Traoré. In the turbulent political landscape of Burkina Faso, the image of Ibrahim Traoré emerges as a symbol of loyalty and national pride. His story is not only a heroic tale of courage, but also a profound lesson in genuine leadership and the power of national dignity. Loyalty and betrayal. One of the prominent elements in the story is the contrast between loyalty and betrayal. When faced with threats from traitors, Ibrahim Traoré chose not to succumb to pressure. His act of burning the threatening letter in front of the messengers was not just an act of defiance, but a powerful declaration of his resolve. At a time when betrayal could shake the foundations of a nation, Ibrahim wisely chose not to resort to violence, but instead relied on integrity, forcing the traitors to leave their positions on their own. This action reflects true leadership, prioritizing loyalty to the people above all else. The battle and national pride. The battle against foreign-backed armed groups is a testament to Ibrahim's and Burkina Faso's army's national pride. Ibrahim not only led from afar but also personally engaged in combat, demonstrating courage and determination to protect his country. He became a symbol of national pride, reigniting faith and hope in the hearts of the people. This battle was not just about reclaiming territory, but also about reclaiming the dignity and pride of a nation once underestimated. A symbol of pride and independence. Ibrahim Traoré has become a symbol of pride and independence for Burkina Faso and Africa. His steadfastness against foreign powers and internal betrayal affirmed his position as a true leader. He inspired a new spirit, an Africa that no longer kneels, no longer pleads, but stands tall with unbreakable pride. Ibrahim's leadership is not just about power, but about the ability to inspire and lead a nation through its greatest challenges. Conclusion. The story of Ibrahim Traoré is a testament to the strength of loyalty, determination, and courage. It reminds us that true leadership is not just about power, but about the ability to inspire and guide a nation through its toughest trials. Ibrahim Traoré has become a symbol of pride and independence, not only for Burkina Faso, but for all of Africa, ushering in a new chapter in history filled with hope and national dignity.